Ship. This week, I've got a new guest coming on called Bret Waters. And Bret spent his entire life in Silicon Valley. He's been an entrepreneur, he's been an executive, he's been an investor. And today, he teaches entrepreneurship at Stanford University, and he runs the Fourthly Startup Accelerator and also coaches startup CEOs at Miller's Center for Social Entrepreneurship. He's successfully raised capital multiple times in his career, and the entrepreneurs he's worked with have raised quite literally hundreds of millions of dollars in capital. And as an entrepreneur in his own right, he was the founder and CEO of Art Machine, the co-founder of Metagraphic, and the CEO and eventually the chairman of Tivix. He's been on the board of the Stanford University Graduate School of Education, and he's been chief mentor of the European Innovation Academy. So beyond being a successful entrepreneur, the thing that stands out most to me with Bret is his willing to teach and help others all around the world. He's helped companies grow at a macro level, but he's also been leaning into coaching individual founders through their personal growth, which is why we're going to call today's episode Growth Without Boundaries. And with that, here we go with another week of O Ship. I can't wait for you to meet Bret. Bret, welcome to O Ship. How are you?
Thanks very much, Freddie. Good morning. Glad to be here.
Good morning. I appreciate you doing the early phone call. I think it's 7 a.m.-ish your time. So we're up to 8 now, so not quite so bad.
It's all good. I've got my coffee, so I'm good.
Well caffeinated, perfect. So I'm just getting to know you. I hope my intro did you justice, but it'd be really great if you could share a little bit of your background, kind of Fourthly, kind of set that foundation of your entrepreneurial background for any of our audience that may not have had a chance to meet you before.
Sure. So I've spent my entire life in Silicon Valley, and so I've kind of had a front row seat to watching Silicon Valley go from being Santa Clara Valley, the kind of sleepy agricultural valley that I grew up in, to being the Silicon Valley of today, kind of a global hub of entrepreneurship and innovation, right? And so along the way, I've been pretty immersed in the world of startups. Three times I've been through the process of founding a company, raising capital, being a CEO, eventually managing an exit. Sometimes the exits have been fun and satisfying, and sometimes they've been slightly more challenging. But that's life as an entrepreneur. And as you said, today I'm just kind of all in on helping other entrepreneurs. That I teach entrepreneurship at Stanford and coach startup CEOs in the largest startup accelerator program for social ventures, people who are trying to save the world. And then I run a small private startup accelerator program of my own, Fourthly. So I'm all in on helping entrepreneurs, Freddie.
Love it. And by the way, I know it sounds ridiculous, but people talk about Silicon Valley so much that I think you actually start to believe it isn't like an actual town name, but people forget to your point, actually an agricultural town with Santa Clara beforehand. I think that's it's easy to forget the history of this area that people associate so much with investment and technology. And then on the educational
I would
side,
say that, sorry to interrupt, Freddie, but I always say that if I could, even though I've enjoyed my career, if I ever get a time machine, I'm going to go back to the mid 1970s, and I'm going to buy up prune orchards and apricot orchards in Mountain View. That's what I'm going to do.
I think so you could sell them to Google one day for a fortune.
Exactly, because where Google sits today, I probably could have bought that land for $500 an acre.
Unreal. Isn't that amazing? It's just wild when you think about it. So when I was researching you and prepping for this the episode today, one of the things that really amused me, in your own words, you described yourself as a teacher guy at Stanford University, and I thought that was pretty entertaining. How did you end up going from the entrepreneurial side of this to getting an opportunity to be a lecturer at Stanford?
Well, like all things, like most things in life, it was just pure serendipity. I happened to be on a board with a guy who was at Stanford, and he mentioned to me one day that they needed a new lecturer to talk about entrepreneurship, and I said, well, maybe I could help out, um, and um, and one thing led to another. So here I am.
I, I see. I've had the opportunity to teach some people at the Miami Ad School and do some kind
Yeah,
of guest
nice.
appearances.
Nice.
Do you enjoy it out of interest? I assume you
Oh, I
love it.
enjoy. Oh, I enjoy it a lot. Yeah, and
Yeah,
my commitment there is very low. I teach one course every other quarter, so
yeah.
it's a super
That
low
sounds
commitment.
like that.
And but
But
yeah, no, I love it. And there's nothing like being around smart young people.
yeah,
It's,
well said. And
especially
what's the
the older I get, the more I want to hang around smart young people. I don't want to hang around people my age.
fair enough. I'm definitely got a question for you on that front since you've gone there. But I'd love to ask, what's given that the experience you have got, what's the most important lesson you think you've been able to teach any of your students?
Well, this will actually tie in pretty well to the title of your show, Freddie. That the life of being an entrepreneur it's a roller coaster life, right? That
Mm,
in the morning you win some big customer deal, and in the afternoon you lose some big customer deal, right? So there's a lot of ups and downs,
mm,
and today there's this concept of mindfulness, right? And I was
mhm.
talking to a faculty member at Stanford one day, and she was explaining to me the concept of mindfulness, and she explained it to me this way. She said, the great American mantra is "oh shit," meaning
Mhm,
something happens and we immediately attach negative judgment to it.
mhm.
She said, mindfulness means shortening that to just "oh." So when things happen, acknowledge them, but don't attach judgment to them. And
I like that.
so I tell my students that it's definitely one of the things that I wish I had understood earlier in my career, because
Mm,
to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to maintain an even keel, right? You have to not get too
mhm,
high or too low.
mhm.
And so this notion of, when things happen, don't attach judgment to them, just acknowledge them, figure out what learnings there are there, and then push forward. I think is a key part of the entrepreneurial mindset.
I love that, and I'll have to have a sequel show now called O. But I think,
There you go. Exactly.
but I think it's such a fair point, and one of the things I think I've seen some entrepreneurs that I've had an opportunity to work with over the years, they get themselves exhausted
Mm,
from whatever challenge they may be having. You don't sleep, you find yourself thinking about things kind
right.
of 24/7, or you kind
Right.
of wallow in some some defeat,
Right.
and the reality is it's just a distraction.
Yep.
And I think, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're working in a professional environment or you're a leader, this ability to kind of just shake stuff off, and it's like, you almost think like soldiers. You can't. You got to get back to that. Got to get back to the battle. Sometimes you can't sit and kind of wallow in self defeat. I think
Exactly right.
is really 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 important. I think it's if you can fix it. And but if you can't fix it, you can't sit and harbor on it.
No, that's right. There's no value in moping under your desk, and
Mm,
especially if you're a CEO, your most important job is to lead the team,
mm.
and moping under your desk is not doing a very good job of leading the team.
Sometimes one can't help but wonder if having a short memory span is
Yeah, right.
sometimes
For
is a
sure.
good thing. You know what I mean? So it's
For
like,
sure.
you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'm not going to get bothered by that. I've always joked with my own, and we're both serial entrepreneurs. I've always kind of joked that I think whether I don't know if I'm a serial masochist or just too stupid to realize that I shouldn't keep jumping into these things, but I don't get hung up on the history. Um, that's a great analogy, and I appreciate that story. Um, so you mentioned this earlier, how you love being surrounded by all these great bright young people, especially
Mm.
at an organization like Stanford University. What would you say is the most important thing you've actually learned from your students? So the inverse, as you've been around all these great bright young people, how have they impacted you, and what have you learned from them?
Wow, such a great question. I wish I had a ready answer. Um,
Now you got a minute, no
the
worries.
the you know the nice thing about being young is you kind of see the world as having boundless opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and later in life you kind of are more focused on your family, your kids, your grandkids, kind of
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And so I think that I think that for me, that's probably the number one thing that I get from being around smart young people is that
Mm-hmm.
being able to once again see the world as being filled with boundless opportunity, because
Mm-hmm.
it is. And I honestly think that one of the things that makes 2022 so awesome is that there's more entrepreneurial opportunity today than any other time in history.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a ton of opportunity right now that through my career in Silicon Valley, there was typically one opportunity wave at a time. Right,
Mm-hmm.
we went through the semiconductor wave, and then we went through the personal computer wave, and then we went through the internet wave, and then we went through the mobile social wave. And each one of those lasted 10, 12, 15 years, and then we were on to the next wave. But right now, there are, 5 or 6 really big salient waves of opportunity going on at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. We've got,
Mm-hmm.
we've got AI and machine learning, right? That's a
Mm-hmm.
whole wave of opportunity of its own. We've got the
Mm-hmm.
whole autonomous vehicle thing. That's a whole wave of opportunity of its own. We've got all the medical technology, biotech stuff, a whole wave of its own.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some people think crypto is a whole wave of its own. This week, maybe that looks a little dicier.
Not quite as fearful as last week. Oh shit! Yeah, that's funny. Do when you think about the last 20 years in Silicon Valley specifically,
Hmm.
do you feel like there was these similar number of waves going through them 20 years ago, or was
No,
it more software? It was really more the essential to software then. I guess software is a broad umbrella, but I just wonder how you feel like it feels different from maybe how it did then.
yeah, well, as I said, I kind of feel as if there was one wave at a time through my
Hmm.
career, and that right now we have multiple waves. So
Hmm.
that's the salient thing.
Yeah.
And Yeah,
Out of interest, what do you think has been the allure of Silicon Valley that's continued to draw in people for so many years?
yeah. Well, entire books have been written on this topic,
Hmm.
and there are a lot of reasons why this one agricultural valley became what it is today.
Hmm.
And So the three great universities is definitely part of it. So
Hmm.
We have Stanford University, University of California at Berkeley, and then Santa Clara University, which is the smallest, but it's the oldest university in California. So
Hmm.
those three universities, a big part of it.
Hmm.
And Honestly, the weather is a big part of it. That the
That's
weather,
fair enough.
the weather around Palo Alto really is just pretty much perfect.
Yeah.
And in the 60s and 70s, kind of as Silicon Valley was getting going, most of the engineering jobs in the United States were on the East Coast, where it's miserable and cold in the winter. And the fact that all of a sudden you could get an engineering job and move your family to a place where the weather was awesome was a
Yeah.
big was a big draw.
Yeah.
But I have a whole lecture that I give on the history of Silicon Valley,
Oh, very
and
cool.
and I finished that lecture by answering the question you just asked, which is, why did Silicon Valley happen? What's
Yeah.
the secret sauce, right? What's the
Yeah.
secret sauce? In what I say is that there's all these different reasons, but to me it distills down to one thing, and that one thing is a culture of reinvestment. Reinvestment not only of financial capital, but also reinvestment of intellectual capital, right?
Mm.
And it happened when Jane and Leland Stanford decided to leave all the money that they had made as entrepreneurs, leave all that money to create a new university for others. It happened when the dean of the Stanford School of Engineering, Fred Terman,
Mm.
started investing in some of his grad students to create startups. And most famously, he
Mm.
invested in Dave Packard and Bill Hewlett as they finished their
Mm.
studies and
Mm.
founded HP.
Amazing.
Um, and It happened when the 12 PayPal founders who founded a company. A year and a half later, they sold the company for $2 billion. So even though there's 12 of them, you split $2 billion 12 ways. That's still a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And those guys, the PayPal founders, the PayPal mafia, as we call them,
Yeah.
they could have easily retired and each bought their own island in the Caribbean, but instead they decided to stick around here and found and fund new companies. And so you look at the list of companies today that were founded by or funded by the PayPal founders. That list includes Facebook, uh, Affirm, um, uh, my mind is blanking now. Tesla, obviously. There's a whole slew of companies that were funded by and or founded by the PayPal
From
mafia.
PayPal money. Yeah.
And again, that's the culture of reinvestment, that they could have retired, but instead they reinvested that money. And the reinvestment, like I said before, of intellectual capital, in Silicon Valley, there's this whole culture of once you've had some experience in your career, you want to become an angel investor and help other entrepreneurs,
Mm.
right? And so to me, that's kind of the one thing that is the secret sauce that has built Silicon Valley.
I think that this entrepreneurial culture of, to use this reinvestment, the sense of like
Yeah.
entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs, obviously
Right.
something I'm really passionate about as well, and obviously I
Right.
know you are. Um, yeah, I feel like a lot of that's a great point. That mindset, I think, certainly made famous by Silicon Valley, and I think that culture is really started to drift in different parts of the in a good way. Obviously, started to drift into other parts of the U.S. as well,
Yep.
which I think is very
And the
exciting.
and the world.
And the world.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect segue, because one of the things I really wanted to touch on today was with Fourthly, and the fact that it has a very kind of global nature in terms of how you're attracting people, globally, startup founders. And I think it has to do with that allure of Silicon Valley on some level. And
Yeah.
so I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that. Assume that anyone listening or watching right now doesn't know anything about Fourthly, and it'd be great if you could just provide some context first.
Sure. So Fourthly is a startup accelerator program that I run, and I limit it to just 10 startups per batch, so that we can
Great.
spend a whole lot of time together. And it is purely Zoom based. And originally that was because I started it during COVID, but now it's become because I love being able to have global participants. And with a Zoom based program, you can have global participants because you don't
Yeah.
have to fly. You don't have to fly in here to Silicon Valley to participate. Um, and then the other differentiating aspect of Fourthly is that it's non-dilutive because you pay to participate, and
Yeah.
so I don't take any equity in your startup.
Yeah.
And partly that's because as a serial entrepreneur myself, I know how valuable your startup equity is, and
Hmm.
giving away 7% of your company to somebody else just because they put you through an accelerator program, that's actually pretty expensive capital.
Pretty expensive. I agree.
Yeah. So that's Fourthly, and the name comes from the fact that the World Economic Forum says that we're now entering the fourth industrial revolution.
Hmm. I
And
like that.
so the first industrial revolution was very much centered around London. It had to do with the steam engine, right?
Hmm.
The second industrial revolution had to do with electricity and mass production, and was
Hmm.
around Detroit and the other big mass
Hmm.
production centers in the world. Third industrial revolution was computers, IT, the internet,
Hmm.
very much centered around Silicon Valley, right?
Hmm.
And the World Economic Forum says that the fourth industrial revolution that we're now entering is the merging of the digital, the biological, and the cognitive. Cognitive being AI and machine learning, that stuff, right?
Hmm.
And that what makes this industrial revolution different than the previous three is it's not happening around one place. It's happening all over the world. That there are clusters of innovation, clusters of entrepreneurship all over the world today.
Hmm.
And there's been a decoupling of centers of capital and centers of innovation, right?
Hmm.
That throughout history, centers of capital and centers of innovation have always been coupled, going all the way back to Florence and the Renaissance, right? The reason that Florence was the center of the Renaissance is that that's where the capital was at the time.
Hmm.
And through my whole career, if you wanted to create a startup, especially a tech startup, you had to locate your startup in Silicon Valley. You just had to, because that's where the capital was. And most of the VCs I know, they would say that they don't invest in any company that they can't, drive over and meet with in person anytime. That's
Mhm.
radically changed now. And of course, COVID was a kind of a forcing function for that, but it was already drifting in that direction. That investors are now investing in companies all over the world because
Mhm.
they realize it ain't all Silicon Valley today.
Mhm.
It's Austin, it's New York, it's London, it's Tel Aviv, it's Florianopolis, Brazil. There are these clusters of innovation all over the world today, and that's probably the salient thing that makes the fourth industrial revolution different than the previous three.
Yeah, what's so interesting if you think about the earlier, the first and second industrial revolution, they required physical things in
Yeah,
physical locations. You could argue that the third industrial revolution, created the information age, which
yep,
then was effectively the enabler of this fourth level.
absolutely.
And I agree that there's all these. For me, it's a combination of. Uh, Democratized access to collaborative technologies that are
Yep,
very inexpensive or
yep,
literally free.
yep,
So it's like, and that enabled, I think, in any part of the world. And then I think, to your point, one of the things I think that came out of COVID, trying to find any positives out of it, is that there were people that didn't believe that you could be as effective working
yeah,
virtually or remotely.
right,
And I think a huge chunk of people said, you know what, the last couple of years I was either more productive
right,
or as productive, and we don't need it. And so they became believers. I mean,
yeah.
some people are not believers. On that note, we mentioned the PayPal mafia earlier and Tesla, and Elon Musk has obviously been in the news a lot lately since his
I've
acquisition of
no, I've
Twitter.
noticed that. I've noticed that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Maybe you may have read. What do you think about him trying to get everyone back into the office? Do you think being in the office, or do you think but remote is fine, or what's your take on in person?
Yeah. So, I'm lucky enough to not be running a company today, and so
Yeah,
I don't have to make those decisions anymore. I
yeah,
think if I was running a company, I think I definitely would develop some sort of a hybrid work policy.
hmm
Because I think there are pros and cons to the remote work
hmm
thing.
yeah,
And so I'm generally a believer in remote work. But I think also that there's a certain kind of magic that happens when the team is together that you can't completely replicate on Zoom.
I agree with that. I
Yeah,
agree with that, especially in group settings.
yeah,
I think the hybrid thing is one of the trickiest parts. I'm now starting to advocate for, like, virtual and remote works, but actually I think it works way better when 100% of the company is either one way or the
mm,
other. Otherwise, you always have these weird tensions where no one's quite synced up. So,
right. Yep.
we're at like whatever 130 full timers now, and never had an office in 7 years, and it really works for us.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
And but I think if we were a little bit of both, it would be
yeah,
a lot harder, frankly.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so when you're dealing with these global startups, what do you mind me asking? Like, if you look at the last couple of years or since you started, is there kind of like a couple countries that you find you tend to work with the most?
Yes. So there's a lot of activity in Latin America right now,
Hmm.
and so I've had several startups from Latin America participate. Of course, we say Latin America as if that's kind of like one country, but in fact, Latin America is a huge geography with a
Yeah,
whole bunch of countries.
ton of
So
diversity.
in particular, Mexico and Brazil are by far the two biggest economies in Latin America,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of interesting innovation coming
Hmm.
out of there. But I've had a couple startups in Peru, and one in Colombia. So the interesting thing about Latin America, of course, is that in some respects, many of those economies are maybe 20 years behind where we are, and so that's kind of an important inflection point,
Yeah,
right?
but what an opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly, exactly. And there's been a lot of really interesting fintech startups come out of Latin America, and part of that's because two reasons. One is um, uh, many of the Latin American countries have two or three big banks that basically control the entire market. And so, like all big incumbents, they're slow and not really interested in embracing innovation. And so that provides an opportunity for a fintech to come along and disrupt the big slow legacy banks.
Mhm.
The other thing that is true throughout Latin America is that there's a very large unbanked community.
Mhm.
So in Brazil, I think it's something like 30 or 40% of the population is unbanked, and
Wow.
it's because the big legacy banks just have never really cared about serving poor people, because you can't make any money from poor people, right?
Mhm.
They want to make their money by serving rich people.
Mhm.
So they just have never made any attempt
Mhm.
whatsoever to serve the bottom, the bottom
Mhm.
third, let's say, of the economic
Mhm.
spectrum.
Mhm.
Whereas fintechs, because of their low operating expenses, they can come in and serve poor people, right? They can,
Mhm.
offer savings accounts and lending programs and all those other financial services products. And that's exciting in two ways. One is it's exciting just because it's an untapped market to be able to
Mhm.
suddenly offer financial services to a third of the population that's never had access to financial services before. It's also pretty exciting from an economic development perspective, because giving poor people access to financial services can be
Help them. Mhm.
huge in terms of helping them improve their livelihoods, right?
Mhm.
If you can
It's up.
borrow $1,000 to start your own little business, that's
Mm.
huge.
Out of interest, the global companies that you're chatting with, are they is it about helping them understand to take the lessons from that you've learned and that your advisors have learned from Silicon Valley and apply them in that market, or is it partially about helping them break into the U.S. market?
No, it's not so much about breaking into the U.S. market,
Mm.
although it is sometimes about breaking into U.S. investment.
Mhm.
That they all, every startup around the world dreams of getting an investment from a Silicon Valley venture capitalist, right?
From a
So
VC firm.
that,
That makes
yeah,
sense.
so that definitely is on their mind, but it's not typically breaking into the U.S. market
Mhm.
of customers. It's typically serving their own market of customers. Yeah.
And I'm going to put you on the spot again, but
Please.
if we think about the kind of biggest bits of advice you had to give a global startup going into 2023, assuming
Yeah.
that's going to be a little bit of a weird year,
Yeah.
what would be the kind of maybe one or two big themes of things you've been telling folks to prep for next year?
Well, the main thing with regard to prep for next year is extend your runway. That
Hmm.
I think raising capital is going to be difficult for the next 18 to 24 months.
Hmm.
And so anybody who's got a 12-month runway right now, I think is in a world of hurt, because the ability to raise capital within the next 12 months is going to be super challenging.
Hmm.
So that's my number one piece of advice: is
Hmm.
extend your runway. So extend your runway by either reducing expenses, or get some revenue, or if you can raise some money, then don't go out and raise 12 months worth of money. Go out and raise 24 months worth
Raise
of
cheers.
money,
That's good,
so that,
good
yeah,
advice. I think for
yeah,
any startup founder out
right,
there.
right. And the
I
and
find
the
out.
and the sell cycles on raising capital right now are much longer than they were a year ago, right? That the year ago, 18 months ago, you could, it wasn't quite this fast. It was almost as if you could pitch on Monday, get a term sheet on Tuesday, and close the round by Thursday, right?
Yeah,
And that ain't happening right now.
yeah,
It's if you can successfully raise capital right now, it's a much longer, more drawn out process.
yeah. Good advice. Funny enough, I've just got a startup company that I'm working on right now, and we're just starting to think about fundraising. I think this is something that's very top of mind for us
Yep.
as well.
Yep.
Um, so, Brett, for super great insight on from all the different aspects of your career. One of the other things I mentioned in the intro to the show was that you also, kind of coach CEOs individually as well. So you've got kind of like your kind of macro level teaching that you do, and then you've got, I think I include the accelerator in that. But how is coaching individual CEOs different from kind of the work that that you do, kind of teaching and lecturing in a group environment?
Sure. So you know, t- teaching and coaching are different things, right? Teaching, traditional teaching is just simply the transfer of knowledge. It's the it's I'm viewing your mind as being a bank that can store some more stuff, and
Hmm.
so I'm going to provide you some more stuff that you can store in your mind. Um, and coaching is is more about asking good questions that will hopefully be helpful as
Hmm.
as you think through a process. Um, and I'm especially careful with people who are operating companies in other geographies around the world. I'm particularly careful about not giving direct advice because I've never run a company in Uganda, so for me to give you advice on how to run your company in Uganda would be that's probably a stretch. Whereas I can kind of help you think through some stuff. I can ask, you know, what kind of numbers do we have on customer acquisition cost? Can you explain to me
Hmm.
kind of what numbers we have on that? And
Hmm.
do we have any idea what the lifetime value of a customer is once we get them?
Hmm.
So it's more about asking good questions. In my experience, more about asking
Hmm.
good questions rather than giving specific advice.
What about, do you feel like you get in on the, how to say this? There's like, I think there's nuances to leadership. There's the
Yeah,
side of like, hey, how do we steer the business? And then there's the side of coaching that is like, how do you be a better leader? And I feel like
right.
those, do you feel like those kind of um, theories, are those more universal, or those like universal human truths that transcend cultures theoretically?
Yes, I'm hesitating only because the characteristics of a good leader probably do vary a little bit by culture. Um, and So I'll give you a quick example that so Harvard did a study a few years ago about the different cultures around the world, different social structures around the world. To what extent is it considered appropriate to push back on to question somebody who is of a higher social status than you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in countries like Scandinavia, it's considered perfectly fine to question somebody who's at a higher socioeconomic status than you are. And there's other countries like, let's say, India that are very, very kind of uh, very stratified and very kind of caste conscious still
Mm-hmm.
about pushing back on somebody who's at a higher status. And I thought about this a lot because part of the unique Silicon Valley culture is that in Silicon Valley, pushback is considered a highly valued thing from your team. In other words, you call a meeting of your team and you say, here's what I think the goals for next quarter should be. And
Mm-hmm.
you want your team to push back, right? That's kind
Mm-hmm.
of part of the Silicon Valley culture.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many parts of the world where that would never happen. That
Mm-hmm.
you call your team together and you say, here's what I think the goals for next quarter should be. And the team is supposed to just
Just
nod and
nodding,
say,
yeah.
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 So I do think that kind of leadership skills do vary a little bit by culture, but
Yeah.
there's a couple of good books on kind of there's 4 or 5 well-defined leadership styles, and so it's so the right style for you, Freddie, is going to be different than the right style
Yeah.
for Merritt, which is different than the right
Yeah.
style for me. But I think it is helpful sometimes to kind of look at the different styles and figure out which one is a good fit
Yeah.
for you.
Good advice, and very fair. I do want to jump to a question from the audience. So, Adam Tovum, tuning in via YouTube, he was agreeing that you were very, very right about raising capital in the next 24 months is going to be hard. But he's also really intrigued about if you see anything else changing in the fundraising landscape. Maybe not so much the landscape, longer runways, but maybe around let's call it alternative or non-traditional sources of capital. He mentioned crypto funding, but I think in general his point was about do we think the money might come from different places, or do you think startup founders should be looking at more
Yeah,
non-traditional sources?
yeah. So first of all, to Adam's specific question about crypto, I think crypto is going to kind of be on hold for at least the next few months because
Hmm. Agreed.
we're still trying to figure out what the second level fallout from FTX is going to be.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I think anything crypto related is going to be kind of on hold until we figure
Hmm.
out how all this shakes out. But to Adam's other question about other sources and structures of capital, yeah, I think that one of the ways in which 2022 is the best time ever to be an entrepreneur is that there are more different sources and structures of capital than ever before. And
Hmm.
Well, most people, if they think startup, they think venture capital, right? They think,
Mm,
if I've got a startup, I've got to find myself a venture capitalist. But
mm,
in fact, you know, the traditional venture capital model only fits a fairly small percentage of startups. That
mm,
the traditional venture capital model is investing in return for equity, right? So I'm buying equity in your company, and and it's based on binary outcomes. It's based on
mm,
the idea that your startup will either go bankrupt or it'll have $1 billion IPO. That's it.
mhm.
And 8 out of every 10 companies that they invest in goes bankrupt, and the other two have $1 billion IPOs, and they're
Yeah,
good. They're happy.
yeah,
But it's binary outcomes, right? They don't want to invest in companies that just kind of do fine for a while,
yeah,
because owning equity in that doesn't do them any good. So
yeah.
so
This is a go big or go home kind of
That's
mentality,
that's
basically.
exactly right. It's like, I
Yeah,
always say that, I always say it's like airplane travel. Airplane travel also has binary outcomes. Either you
mhm.
arrive safely or you die. There isn't anything in between. Nobody,
I'll try to
no,
remember that next time I get on a
yeah,
plane.
nobody gets a little hurt. Everyone gets a little hurt on an airplane trip, right? You either arrive safely or you die.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah,
And the venture capital business is based on that same set of binary outcomes.
yeah,
And so that's fine if you are a Uber or an Airbnb and you just simply want to go big or go home and have somebody just shovel cash into the engine to allow you to scale
yeah,
at an unnatural pace, which basically was what venture capital lets you do, right? It lets you scale at
yeah,
an unnatural pace. So that's fine. But there's a whole lot of other companies out there that are perfectly good companies, but they're not a good fit for that model. And so the good news is that today there's all kinds of different sources and structures of capital.
yeah.
Um, I did a deal recently it's a revenue share note, and so it's I put 100 grand into the company in return for a note, and the payments on the note are defined as being 5% of the revenue of the company.
Oh,
So every quarter, I get an email saying, here was our revenue last quarter. Here's your check for 5% of that. And that continues until I get 1.5 times my investment back, and then it's done. So,
interesting. And
nice.
it didn't dilute them. No equity
No,
dilution for them.
that's right. No dilution because it's not equity based. I'm happy because I'm going to get 1.5 times my investment back. Hey, that's
Yeah.
not bad.
Oh yeah.
They're happy because they didn't give away any equity. And
Hmm.
it's pretty easy for them to service that note if they just got to build into their spreadsheet
Hmm.
the fact that
Yeah.
5% of the revenue every quarter is going to me. That's easy to build into
Hmm.
their economic model. And then once it caps out, then I'm gone. They never have to see me again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're seeing a lot of structures like that traditional venture capitalists won't do because they're interested in the $1 billion outcome if you have an
Yeah.
IPO. But for angel investors, deals like that make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Good. Good. I actually, I mean, I guess totally understood it's conceptually possible to see one tied to revenue, but I hadn't seen that before. That's really interesting. So a great answer. Okay. It is that time on the show where I have to ask for your O Ship story. For those of you who have never watched O Ship before or tuned in via our audio podcast, one of the key premises of O Ship is that we like to ask leaders and entrepreneurs about a moment in their life where maybe they things hadn't worked out as they had planned, whether some big decision, maybe it's a business venture, whatever it was, and we'd like to know how people dealt with it. Sometimes this may be something that said, it really made me think about how I'm a leader, or make me realize how I approach challenging situations, and it changed me. Sometimes people, it's some inspiring story that made them have a different level of empathy for folks, and sometimes they're just complete ship shows where they were just not very funny when they happen, but really damn funny in hindsight. I don't, and maybe there's categories outside of that, but it's certainly a pattern we've noticed. Uh, Brad, I'm sure you have quite a few of these tucked away, but I would love to hear what you think is a worthy addition to the O ship history of
Yeah,
wacky stories we've heard.
yeah. I have a lot of those, Freddie. My, I
Okay.
always say that my role in life at this point is to be a cautionary tale for others.
Good. That Dave, we all appreciate you.
But I'll tell you, I'll tell you one particular story that I think is, and the reason I'm going to tell this one is that I think it's a really, uh, uh, it's a really informative story for entrepreneurs today. And here's how the story goes. So I had a startup once where I was super excited about it, and I worked really hard on my pitch deck. I worked really hard, and I created the world's greatest pitch deck, and I carefully rehearsed everything so that my narrative lined up just perfectly with every single slide. And there was even one section where um, it kind of appeared to be a live demo because I knew exactly where to click on the screenshots in order to make some stuff happen, right?
Yeah.
So I worked really, really hard on this pitch deck. Excuse me. And I reached out to a buddy of mine who was a VC partner at a fund, and I said, "Hey, can I come in, just give you my little pitch? Love to just get some feedback from you." So I went in and I launched into my carefully rehearsed pitch with my absolutely beautiful slide deck, and this guy loved everything. It's like, he practically stood and cheered when I was done with my pitch. And he said, "That was awesome. That's one of the best pitch decks I've ever seen." And we're definitely interested in investing. And I walked out of there high-fiving myself about how brilliant I was. And next day I got an email from him that said, "Hey, we're definitely interested. I'd like to have you go and meet with this other VC friend of mine, and we'll see whether he might want to co-invest with us." And I said, "Cool, awesome." So I went in to see this other VC, and I walked into his office, sure that it was going to be, that I was going to be just as big a success as I was before. Because I'll tell you, this pitch deck, Freddie, this was the best pitch deck in the history of pitch decks. Exactly.
Brings tears to the eyes.
And so I walked into this other guy's office, and I opened up my laptop and connected my laptop to his screen. And this other VC goes, "Close that fucking laptop up." He said, "I'm sick and tired of entrepreneurs who come in here and show me pretty pitch decks. What I want to know is, can you tell me using words and words alone why what you're working on is so interesting that I would want to invest?" And I went, but my pitch deck.
Wow.
So the reason I love telling that story to new entrepreneurs is that, it's so true that you have to be able to tell the story on its own, right?
Yeah.
That, that ability to tell the crisp, clear, and compelling story of what you're working on and why it matters is one of the most important skills for any entrepreneur to have. And you've got to be able to do it without having a fancy pitch deck, right?
Yeah. I love that.
And that, most people think of pitching as being in the context of raising money. But the reality is that great entrepreneurs are pitching all day long, right? They're pitching for customers, they're pitching for partners, they're pitching as they're trying to recruit employees, right? That ability to tell the crisp, clear, and compelling story of what you're working on and why it matters is just a fundamental entrepreneurial skill.
I love it. Do you think, out of interest, do you think the first investor knew what you were getting into when he sent you over there, or do you think that was just a fluke?
Oh, no, he knew exactly. Yeah.
He said, "That's great. Go try that again. Good luck."
Exactly.
That's amazing. But it's such a great point. I think people need to remember your pitch is your pitch, and the deck needs to be in addition to that. It isn't the pitch. You know what I mean? It's an aid.
Right.
And I think people get so reliant on it. I think it's great advice.
The slides aren't going to sell the deal. You got to sell the deal yourself. Yeah.
Out of interest, when you did try and get through at that particular time, and obviously you're a far different person today than you are in that moment. Were you able to kind of get the story out, or did it really throw you off the deep end? If you know what I mean.
Oh no, he ended up investing. So
that's great. Good. But it's still a major lesson learned.
Oh yeah, I was sweating bullets. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, I heard there's a couple of entrepreneurs out there. I think Steve Jobs was another one of the ones that never wanted to ever see a deck. No, it's Jeff Bezos hates decks.
Bezos, yeah,
Bezos hates decks.
That's right. Bezos supposedly had a no slide deck policy at Amazon.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's awesome. This was so interesting, Brett. I really, really enjoyed chatting with you. I think that was a perfect way to end today's episode. If people want to find out more about you, or follow you or engage you with any of your businesses, what's the best way for people to do that?
Probably LinkedIn is the best way, but I'm on all the socials, and I'm my handle on all the socials is just Bret Waters. I'm Bret Waters on Twitter. I'm Bret Waters on Instagram.
And that's
Um,
Brett with one T, just to
Bret
be
with one
clear for
T,
anyone who's
exactly.
listening
Bret
in.
with one T. Bret Waters. I'm Bret Waters on Venmo if you want to send me any money.
Perfect, perfect. Send me some money too. That Brett, that was great. So good to really get to know you a bit more today. I hope we get a chance to meet in person one day. For all of you listening into Oh Ship right now, whether you're watching the live stream or tuning in via any of our audio podcasts, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for being a subscriber to Oh Ship. You showing up every week to watch the show means an awful lot to us, and it's the energy that keeps us going every week. The best thing you can do to support us is give us a like, share the episode with a friend, or if you haven't followed or subscribed, if you could do so now, that would be wonderful. Brett, thanks again for your time. Great to
Been a
see
pleasure.
you,
Been a
and we'll
pleasure.
see everyone else next week on Oh Ship.